Psychiatry for a Mad World. An extract from the book. Sure enough, the next day the odd woman was as good as her word and made her radio appearance, publicising her fundraising events. She still sounded somewhat eccentric, but she achieved a lifelong ambition and performed some puppetry live on air. I laughed out loud. It was clear to me that this was a case of prejudice and stigma. The woman, who may have had mental health problems, was being treated as a second-class citizen, being encouraged to leave a public house. But what was she in reality? She was a slightly odd woman who was very generously giving her time up for a worthwhile cause, and that was a healthy thing to do. And what was the vicar in reality? The incident reminded me of Christ's words from his most important sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. In the first of the Beatitudes, he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Matthew 5:3. This was the first line, so it must have been highly significant to Christ. The word poor here derives from an Aramaic word, anya, in Hebrew ani, which translates as bent down, afflicted, miserable, or poor. I am in disagreement with some Christian interpretations, but to my mind the people who are really poor in spirit are those with mental illness. If you had chronic depression, you couldn't be much more bent down, afflicted, or miserable. So here, in the most important line of the most important sermon from the world's largest religion, Christ said, "Blessed are the mentally ill." But this was totally overlooked by the woman who was on the payroll of the Christian church. She wasn't only indifferent to our charity worker, she was actively hostile, cruel and selfish. A 2004 government report into social exclusion and mental health backs up the importance of spiritual groups for some people with mental illness. Quote, "Research has shown that aspects of spirituality are linked with beneficial mental health outcomes and are consistently related to greater life satisfaction, happiness, morale, and other indicators of well-being." End quote. The vicar then had a greater responsibility than most to look after the odd woman in the pub, but she failed in her duty. So who was the person who was mentally ill? Lies are always a strong sign that cruelty and selfishness are around, and the landlady lied about the pub closing time, a clue that she was in fact ill. In reality, our odd charity worker was far more healthy, and indeed Christian, than the group of ordinary women who considered themselves to be mentally well. No, them and us, yet again. The same government study into social exclusion and mental illness concluded that people with long-term mental illness are among the most excluded in society, and that exclusion has a major bearing on their mental health. Quote, "Mental health problems can be both a cause and a consequence of social exclusion." End quote. The study defined the core of social exclusion as, quote, "lack of participation in mainstream social, cultural, economic and political activities." End quote. Visiting a public house would certainly count as a social or cultural activity, and so our friend's expulsion from the pub was, by government standards, an example of social exclusion. The study stated that, quote, "being in work and having social contacts is strongly associated with improved health and well-being," end quote, and went on, quote, "social isolation is an important risk factor for deteriorating mental health and suicide. 2/3 of men under the age of 35 with mental health problems who die by suicide are unemployed." End quote. The study identified stigma as a main cause of social exclusion. Quote, "Stigma and discrimination against people with mental health problems is pervasive throughout society. Despite a number of campaigns, there has been no significant change in attitudes." End quote. The report called for, quote, "the acceptance of people with mental health problems as equal citizens." End quote. So the women in the pub had a responsibility. Their actions could have made the puppeteer's health worse by excluding her, but the flip side of the coin is that they could maybe have improved her health by including her as part of their community. Mental illness is caused or cured by wider society, by ordinary people who perceive themselves as healthy.